Hey guys, this is Max and welcome to another episode of the story behind the shoot. And today's episode is a little bit different because I want to focus on two aspects. And the first one is the ideation process for this particular photo set and the element of chance and spontaneity. So how do you as a photographer react to spontaneous changes on site? And how do you ensure that you move away from your vision in a reasonable fashion and that it makes fun doing that? And that you still retain that feeling of being in control to some extent while having the openness in your mind to do something really creative on site. So the idea for this particular photo set came when the model suggested the model is a musical performer and part of her training is dancing. And she suggested to do something around dance. So she wanted to be photographed in her dance outfit. And of course, we then thought about what kind of locations make sense, and the usual stuff are in either urban environment or something out in nature. And we settled on something more specific, saying, how about we do have a rather strong contrast, have you as a beautiful dancer with kind of crazy strong poses, and as a backdrop have a slaughterhouse district with all its metal, concrete and brick walls, but also a certain degree of human touch due to all the graffitis that are usually around there. So this was the setup that we agreed on at first. And I was like, okay, I do want to shoot that mostly on black and white film, and I had one particular backdrop in mind where I also wanted to use some Fuji Provia and use some color slide film. Then the element of chance came in when we took a look at the weather forecast and had to realize for the day we had planned this shoot, there would be minus 10 degrees Celsius, so really, really cold. And we would potentially have either snow on the ground or it would even be snowing. And we discussed whether we should postpone the shoot or do it anyways. And we finally agreed to do it anyways, as long as we would be able to really protect the model to ensure that she would be warm at all times. And to really ensure that she doesn't get sick at all, by all means, this would be our primary focus. So we ended up driving onto the site itself with a car and basically had the model return back into the car after each roll of film. Since I was shooting 6x7 medium format, that meant after every 10 shots, she would be able to go back into the car with a blanket, warm up again. We had the engine running and all that. And yeah, warm up again while I was kind of out changing film and taking a look at the setting for our next roll of film. And because of that, we were kind of able to not keep her warm at all times, but keep her mostly warm or warm enough. That's at least also what she said at the end. And another aspect or another element of surprise here was that I had, as I just said, imagined one of the backgrounds where I had also shot before and has made some good experiences with. And when we arrived on site, we had to realize, okay, there is a cart parked from some of the slaughterhouse businesses right in front of that background, so I couldn't use that. And we ended up having to be completely spontaneous about the settings. We had to rush a little bit because of the cold, and at the same time I wanted to ensure that it doesn't feel rushed. And it required both of us, both the model and me as a photographer, to be spontaneous and to react, to be creative on the spot and react to the setting, to the sun that was coming through, to the floor that was covered in snow. And what we ended up doing was having rather strong poses, dance poses, on that slaughterhouse, icy, snowy slaughterhouse dance floor, as we called it then, and with a rather clean, or let's say not clean backgrounds, but kind of playing with the variety of backgrounds that were available there. It also meant, in terms of the photography, it meant that I only shot 60 images, so 6 rolls of film, and that mostly I had to make do with one shot per pose. and per setting, because I wanted to keep her moving. I didn't want her to stand at one particular location for too long, so I was kind of mentally counting to ensure that she does not stand somewhere longer than 2.5 minutes or so. And to keep her moving, to keep her kind of mentally active and spontaneous and creative. And that worked out beautiful. And that in part, of course, or in large part, is we have to give credit to the model here, because what Hannah, and some of you might know her from earlier photo sets, what Hannah did here was amazing. She brought with her that kind of spontaneity that was needed, the willingness to react to the setting and to the environment, to bring in her own suggestions. So I didn't have to do much as a photographer. She came up with all sorts of poses, dance moves and things like that. And since she already knew the process of shooting with analog medium format cameras, she also knew how I would work as a photographer. So when I would focus, when I would take the shot, and when she would be able to transition into a new pose. So it was really easy to go through different settings and different poses and work through one roll of film rather quickly. And when Jules and I talked in the car afterwards, we were both saying like, wow, this felt so easy and so good despite the temperature, and despite the kind of sudden changes that we had to react to. And I was really, really pleased with her as a model, and she did an amazing job there. So one thing that I should also mention is, of course, the equipment. I used my trusted Mamiya RZ67 with a 110mm Sekor lens for that. I had originally intended to also use my new 250mm Sekor lens for more traditional portraits, but then on site I decided, since her poses were so interesting, and then since it was so cold anyways, and it was hard for her to come up with a good and solid controlled facial expression, we decided to just stick to rather wide shots where her poses would be the center of attention and not so much her facial expressions. And I think looking at the final images, I think that really worked out well. And I did kind of sneak in some detail shots to bring in some variety for the entire set, so that I can also just have a detail here and there. But even shooting details, of course, is difficult with that kind of temperature, because of course she would have goosebumps and things like that. And again, I didn't want to rush her or get too close, and in a situation like that where she already feels exposed with -10 degrees, surrounded by snow, of course having the morning sun, which was kind of a warming factor here. And yeah, having that situation where she felt like, okay, I'm completely focused and active, and then I can go back to the car. Yeah, so similar to what I said in my last episode surrounding the story behind the shoot, that was all about constraint. It was a very similar situation here, and the constraint was largely coming from the cold and the time constraint, so to speak. In terms of film, I decided to shoot T-grain film, T-grain black and white film. So I had the Kodak T-Max 400 for the first roll of film when it was still a little bit darker, and then as soon as the sun was coming through, a transition to Ilford Delta 100, a film that I really, really like. What is interesting about this film, in my opinion, is that it almost gives the images a digital look to them, because it's so clean, you hardly see any grain, especially on medium format. And then as a color film, as mentioned before, I stuck to my Fuji Provia 100 because I was really interested in seeing how would the snow and all the gray tones that were surrounding us and were often part of the background, how would they work out? Because I knew that the grays typically kind of go towards blue, and a little bit also the whites, and they wanted that kind of cold look that of course was also given by the Slaughterhouse environment and the snow lying on the floor. So the overall light had that coldness in it, or the potential for a blue tone in it. And yeah, again, take a look at the results. I think this was a great choice of film for that particular case. I have to admit that I relied heavily on the built-in light meter of the prism finder of the Mamiya RZ67. So again, since we were kind of in a rush and I didn't want it to feel like we were rushed, I only metered. I used my handheld Gaussian Starlight 2 meter only occasionally. And usually at the start of each roll, I briefly, and setting, I briefly did one measurement, and kind of double checked my settings with the camera. And that's it, because I simply couldn't do a measurement for each setting, for each new shot and so forth. And as soon as I had the slide film in there, I just went automatic and thought, okay, this, I have to rely on this here. And it was enough already to close down the aperture and focus on that as well, because as I said, we really had to work fast here. So I was primarily focusing, for the slide film, I was primarily focusing on the framing, on focusing, and then on getting my exposure right by changing the aperture. That's all we did. Yeah, so without further ado, let's take a look at some more of the behind the scenes footage and of course the final images. Enjoy. So I hope you enjoyed this little story behind the shoot video. If you liked it, please remember to leave us a comment in the comment section below and even like the video here on YouTube. If you want to see more videos like that, please subscribe to our channel. As you know, we really appreciate that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.